So, who are the great cloud of witnesses that we read of in the book of Hebrews? This is a very famous verse. Now, I've heard things from people like Rabbi Tovia Singer who say that, well, because there's this concept of heaven and the threat of hell in the Brit Hadashah, that it doesn't align with the Tanakh, because this is now the Christian Bible, not the Hebrew Bible. And I would agree with him that the concept of heaven and hell and people going directly there after they die is not a biblical concept. And for that, you're going to want to see the study I release on what happens after death. I conducted a Bible study today at my church, but I want to release the full version on YouTube. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Now notice the word therefore. That means, grammatically speaking, it's a continuation of Hebrews 11. And there are traditions and interpretations that suggest that this would be referring to heavenly angels recording human events, or that this would be saints, like people who lived righteous lives and have passed on and are now observing us carry out our faith. And in the Jewish tradition, like if you read the extra biblical book of the Wisdom of Solomon, you have this idea of their ancestors, the Tzaddikim, the righteous ones, being the people observing us walking out our faith. But that's not what this verse is saying, because that contradicts the biblical doctrine of soul sleep. So, what is this verse really saying? Well, a few things. It points us to righteous examples such as Abraham, who believed in the resurrection, and that's why he was willing to offer up his son Isaac, to Moses, who possessed the faithfulness to leave Egypt. And it says that he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Well, for my Unitarian New Testament believers, my agency doctrine New Testament believers, it literally says that he saw Yahweh, because Yahweh is the person who is invisible. Yes, the subject of that verse is Yahweh. So if you're an agency only believer, you'd have to conclude one of two things. This verse is literally talking about Yahweh, which I think is the simplest and best explanation, or that it's talking about God's agent, because in the Talmud, the rabbis establish a law that the agent is to be regarded as the same as the person whose power the agent is operating on. And the writer of Hebrews also mentions that the many prophets that God sent were put to death by stoning, sawed into two, killed by the sword, and that they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And the last line is very interesting. Let me get to that in a second. Well, interestingly enough, there's a rabbinic tradition that some suggest come from Rome, where Isaiah hid in the hollow trunk of a cedar and was sawed into two. So when the writer of Hebrews says that some of the prophets were sawed into two, it could be a hint that the prophet Isaiah was sawed into two, even though it's not explicitly mentioned in canon, or it could just be saying that other holy ones that God sent were sawed into two for their faith. Now, here's a common misconception that people believe. The Greek word for martyr is martis, which is translated witness in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1. So we have a great cloud of witnesses, but martyrdom does not refer exclusively to death. It could also refer to hardship, persecution, or sacrifice, which is why the writer of Hebrews said in chapter 11 and verse 37 that some faced hardship and persecution. For example, if a believer in Jesus is sent to prison and is fed cat litter for dinner, they are considered a martyr. The Greek word for cloud is also very important, nephos, because people think of this as like a heavenly cloud, like we're looking up and there are people literally looking down at us. But that's not what this verse is saying. The Greek word nephos just means a great number of people. So what is the Bible saying? It says we have a great number of witnesses, a great number of testimonies, a great number of good examples. And so the writer of Hebrews is urging us to follow in their footsteps, and that is it. Hope you enjoyed this study. See you soon.